Hello you legends and welcome back to Create Inc. I know most of you are here today so you can learn how to make these beautiful time-lapse videos, and we will get right to that in just a moment. Before all of that though, for my 1500 subscribers, if you guys are still here and watching, even when I haven't posted a video in years, I'm really glad and thankful to have you. So with that out of the way, in today's video we'll talk about this add-on that I've made that takes GCode and spits out a time lapse. We will talk about some of the technical details, how it's different from version 1, which I have already open sourced and the link is in the description. And towards the end, we will talk about some tips and tricks to get great results. And with that, let's just get started. So I always want to create some of these very cool time-lapse 3D printing videos, right? And I do have my own setup for it. But honestly, no matter what I do, it always leaves some artifacts on my print. And I'm working with a moving build plate printer. I have a Prusa Mark 3S. So I was thinking instead, if I could just use the same G-code and create some really cool renders in Blender, it will eliminate the need for me to light up my printer, set up a camera, and to have some, residue left on my print. So that's exactly what I did. I created a tool which will take your OrcaSlicer or PrusaSlicer G-code and give you a model you can very easily work with, and you can use it to create time lapses. The biggest difference from version 1 is that instead of creating curves and letting Blender take care of the geometry, I just went ahead and calculated and created all the points of the mesh this time. And how does that help? It gives me very fine control of how the mesh should be constructed. And let's just take a look at how Blender works with all of this. Let's assume that this is a print line that we've imported from a G-code. Now, Blender allows us to apply a profile object to it to give it some geometry. I can go to the bevel feature and select another object, a profile curve, and you will see it will apply it as a geometry to this curve. I will try and shape it a little bit more like a print line. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for our reasons. So now let's go back here and let me select this curve. Blender allows me to create 2D or 3D curves, and both of them have their own unique problems. For example, if I select this vertex here and I try to decrease the angle when it's on 2D mode, you will get this very bugged out appearance, which is something we definitely don't want. And if we switch to 3D, you will get very uneven width on the curve, which again is something we don't want. This though is amongst the lesser of the problems. I mean, version 1 was dealing with this and working around all of this with some workarounds here and there, and was managing almost fine. The bigger problem was that because Blender has to recalculate this geometry all the time, it led to a sluggish UI and slower render times. An even bigger problem was that because only one profile object can be applied to one curve, that means every time the width or height changes for every layer, there would have to be a new curve object. And that led to hundreds of thousands of objects in one project. And that made the UI very sluggish for objects with about 1,000 or more layers. And that also led to exponentially higher render times for higher layer numbers. But that's not the case anymore. And if you will take a look at this, at the line widths with something that I've imported with version 2, you will see that these are very even and very polished looking. You can always play around with the resolution as well in the settings. So all of this is now a lot easier to deal with. The UI works a lot smoother and the render times are a lot smaller in version 2. I have made a detailed wiki regarding all of the settings and the link is in the description. But here's a quick rundown of things on how to use this add-on. So you can use either PrusaSlicer or OrcaSlicer to create the G-code. These are the only two it works with at the moment, but more slicers will be added later. So in OrcaSlicer, you import your model. Remember to turn off arc fitting. Both PrusaSlicer and OrcaSlicer have this option. Then go to slice plate and your G-code will be created. You can then export this file. I have already exported it. Go back to Blender and find your file. Here is mine. When you click accept, the load G-code button should light up. Then click load G-code. It will slowly start appearing on your screen. Remember to not play around with Blender when this is happening. When the model is being loaded, don't zoom in, don't select other objects, don't do anything with Blender for just a few minutes. Let it process in peace. You can watch a YouTube video if you want. Once that happens, you have your model in Blender. You can use the layer index property. You just have to put a keyframe on it if you want to create a time lapse. You can also change the material. Remember, you have to be in material preview mode for this to happen. Just select any layer, go to the materials tab, and then just pick whatever color you want. There are many more features. All of these settings are explained in the wiki. It also works with multi-material prints. And one feature I would like to run down really quickly is applying extruder error. So you go here, you select a probability you like, enter 25 to 30% mostly. You click make selection. It will select whatever probability you've put, that many layers. So right now 25%, and click apply errors. And you will see some extruder error will appear on your print. For all of the rest, please check out the wiki. Here are some tips and tricks for good results. If I have any supports in my G-code, I would generally just load it twice. First, I will load everything without the supports, and then I will load just the supports. So towards the end of my render, I can just hide the supports and reveal a clean print. For the rendering settings, these are some of the settings that can be useful to you if you're using cycles. There are two render engines in Blender. There is Eevee and Cycles. Cycles is more real, but if you're new to Blender, I would recommend that you stick to Eevee because it's going to give you faster results. But if you are using Cycles, these are some of the settings that I use to speed up my renders and to get good results. So in Cycles, these are the settings that you should be looking at. For the device, use GPU compute, not CPU. In the sampling section, go to render and increase the noise threshold to 0.1. Max samples, you can make it 1024, but it doesn't really matter because the noise threshold is now higher. Make sure denoising is turned on, leave everything else at default. The light paths are very important. These are the settings that work the best for me. Leave the total at 2. Decrease diffuse to 1, glossy to 2, transmission to 1, and transparent to 1. You can play around a little. You can increase some of the settings for some of the renders and see the difference it makes to the image quality. Make sure reflective and refractive check marks are turned off in caustics. Make sure fast GI approximation is turned on. Then scroll down to performance and make sure persistent data is turned on. This is very important when you're working with a time lapse. So your first render of the first frame might be a little slower, but the rest of them will go a lot faster if persistent data is turned on. These are all of the settings you need to be worried about in the rendering settings, and that's all. I actually don't use my machine to render any of the time lapses. Still frames, yes, but rendering the entire time lapse on my machine is going to take way too long, and I cannot be away from my computer for that long. So what I do is I just load the G-code in Blender. I create the whole scene. I set up the time lapse, lights, and everything. And then I rent a machine on vast.ai. I just upload my blend file and all the related files and run a script on vast.ai to render my time lapse. If you just want someone to do the renders for you, you can drop me a message on Discord or Reddit and I will do them for you at a very reasonable price. If you need help with anything with the add-on, please reach out to us on Discord or on Reddit. I will leave the links in the description. And that brings us to the end of yet another video. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button. If not, the other one is okay. Please subscribe and comment and give me some of that sweet engagement. And until next time, just keep building.